we are. Beth is not going to be with us this morning. She's teaching class. So what a wonderful thing for her and her students. But we are going to be losers here. We are losing out because Beth isn't with us. And I'm sure we'll all feel, y'all included, but us particularly, because we're having conversation about all kinds of things specific to religion and tradition, and I guess changes in sociogeography and a whole bunch of other things. We're really excited to get to visit. This is Dr. Frank Bellizzi. It's been a long time. I'm not positive, Frank, you've been on this under this new format yet.
No, the last time I was sitting in on a podcast, we were in a different place and different format. We weren't recording video. We were simply recording audio at the time. So yeah, good to be back. I think this is my third or fourth time on Life in Bomb City. So good to be back. And you had asked me several weeks ago, maybe more like months now, hey, why don't you come back onto the podcast and let's record another one? And I said, sure. But at the time, I don't think either one of us had a really good idea of, well, what will this particular episode be about? So I said, well, why don't I come up with some ideas? And what I sort of landed on was this idea of what I've been reading lately and what sort of piqued my interest recently is kind of where we're going today. So that puts a little pressure on me to kind of come up with the basic material for what we're talking about. But I got started thinking about all of this with an article that came out in the Wall Street Journal about a month ago titled, "Are Americans Really Losing Their Religion?" And this is a short article written by a couple of experts. The authors' names are Ryan Burge and Tony Jones. One's more of a political scientist. The other one's more of a theologian, but they work and they write together and they say, okay, what's happening to religion in the national context of America these days? And so they talk about, of course, they point to what anyone who's thinking about American religion over the last 15, 20, 25 years, people have said it over and over again, and that is that the fastest growing religious demographic in the United States today is what they call the nuns. And of course, they're not saying N-U-N-S, they're saying N-O-N-E-S. These are the people who tell people who are conducting surveys, demographers, that sort of thing. When they're asked, when Americans are asked, what is your religious affiliation? People respond with the word none, or if none is an option on a list, that's the box they check. And so
would this be the same box as like not applicable?
Not applicable, yes, just NA, right? None. And so I think initially when this data first started to emerge and people were noticing this, that we were becoming apparently a less and less religious nation. I think this was happening at basically the same time that you had people like Richard Dawkins or the late Christopher Hitchens or an American named Sam Harris, who sort of became famous or infamous, depending on your perspective, as people who were either skeptics, agnostics, or in many instances, they were practical atheists. I think Hitchens always called himself an anti-theist. And I don't want to get into the weeds on this, but I think that one of the reasons that these intellectual leaders said things like, I'm an anti-theist, is because they did not want the onus and the burden of having to prove that there is not a God. So one of the big debates right now with regard to the truth claim that there is a God, that there is a higher power, the God of the Christian Bible, the God of Judaism, what have you. One of the big debates about that is who bears the burden? Do theists or do atheists bear the burden of so does an atheist bear the burden of proving that there's not a God? And this is something that I think that Hitchens and Dawkins and their group always wanted to avoid, because that's a difficult. Turns out it's about as difficult to prove that there's not a God as it is to prove that there is a God. And so nobody wants. So what Hitchens would say is, I just don't find that the likelihood or the probability based on the evidence that we have, a rational person can't possibly come to the conclusion that there is a God. So I'm an anti-theist in that sense, but he did not want to be an atheist. In fact, years ago, I saw a debate that he held in Southern California with a well-known Christian theologian, kind of evangelical, conservative Protestant, whose name is William Lane Craig, quite a scholar. And so in each other, the two had kind of met their match. But one thing I noticed about that debate was they were really debating who had the burden of proving his position. And so what William Lane Craig kept trying to get Hitchens to accept was, it's your responsibility as an atheist to prove that there is no God. And the debate was all about Hitchens kind of trying to fend off that responsibility and not accept that onerous, burden is really what he's doing in that debate. So all that to say, when those scholars I mentioned a minute ago and popular spokesman said what they were saying within the last 20 or 30 years, then when we noticed that people were increasingly saying, I belong to, or none, right? No religious affiliation. The thought was, we're becoming a nation of atheists and skeptics and agnostics. Turns out that's not the case. Why? Well, because of the tens of millions of nuns in America. A lot of those people, a huge percentage of those people say they still believe in God. They pray. Many of them report that they pray on a daily basis. They might, they're cool with Jesus, if I can put it that way.
It's like a DC talk.
Yes.
Yeah, DC talk 90s.
Yes, they're cool with Jesus. They're just all right with Jesus. And they probably subscribe to the idea that the Bible, the Christian Bible, is in some way a unique book that has some sort of unique authority, tells us things that we otherwise wouldn't know about Christ, wouldn't know about God. All of those things were still intact. So really what we have now a nation in the United States where tens of millions of people have walked away from what you might call institutional religion. They don't go to brick and mortar churches. They don't participate in organized religion on a Sunday or any other time. But they've retained a lot of the trappings or cardinal beliefs of Christianity that they grew up with and were taught by their parents. And that makes it more complicated, makes it a more interesting situation than if we had a fully secularized or increasingly secularized United States of America. Now, the two authors, Burge and Jones, go on to say now that among the nuns, there are also what they call dones, D-O-N-E-S. And these are the people who not only say, I have no religious affiliation, but I'm never going back. I can't conceive of myself for the rest of my life ever being involved with with institutional religion again. And then they say among the nuns, they say evangelical nuns. I would call them evangelistic duns. And these are the people who are not only done with religion, but they're out to persuade other people that religion is bogus, religion is a sham, that organized religion is, if anything, it's toxic, that sort of thing, which is a very, very different position from, say, a David Hume many years ago, who was an English philosopher, who basically said that religious truth claims they're basically not credible on the basis of reason. Hume, I think, was a guy who either said, or sounds like he would have said, that he wished that he could have been a Christian believer. He wished that he could have been a true blue church member, because he recognized the social and emotional, psychological benefits
Right.
of participating in religion. So
Hugo Black, he was the Hugo Black of that period, the Hugo Black, the civil rights guy. Specifically though, I'm thinking of the Griswold v. Connecticut decision, and it's kind of a sidebar to what we're talking about here, because I don't know if our plan is to get into any of the individual social issues or issues that might be like why someone would choose to be in one denomination and not in another, or one that would be the glue of this congregation and maybe not another. Griswold v. Connecticut was the 1960s case that decided it was a Planned Parenthood case, and it had to do with contraceptives in the state. And Hugo Black, while in a closed session, there was someone taking notes, thankfully. So we have the notes from that. And I need to show them. I need to show you those notes, because there's interesting. It's not the only thing that was said that was interesting. He says that, though, he goes, I really want to be able to do this, but I can't. I want to be able to join with you guys and ruling that you have a right to privacy, essentially. And I think it's Douglas, and it's a couple of other big name people, and he said, but I just can't. It's like I can't break away from the Constitution.
Sure.
For him, it was the Constitution that he couldn't break out of, and he was like, but I see all these added benefits of this.
Right.
It's cool, kind of maybe an interesting parallel between the way the Supreme Court examines things and
has philosophical versus a kind of a legal Supreme Court world comparison, where you have people who say, I can see all kinds of benefits. I could wish this for myself, but in terms of interpreting reality, or in the case of Black, interpreting the Constitution, I just can't. I can't go there.
Yeah.
So
I can only be loyal to this.
Right. So the question is not merely if a person is religiously engaged, but if they're not, what are the reasons, and what aspects of their inherited religion, or the religion that they were taught by their society or their parents, what aspects of that have they retained? You mentioned, kind of denominational loyalty, or like reasons why a person would be a part of one particular religious group and not another. And that's another aspect of religious life in America over the last 30, 40, 50 years. And that is what we would call sort of brand loyalty has basically evaporated. So that whereas 50, 60 years ago, if someone had grown up, let's say, in the Presbyterian Church, and as an adult had embraced Presbyterianism, they weren't going anywhere else. That was their silo, right? That was their denomination. Whereas in the last 30 years, especially, people really don't care that much about denominational affiliation, creedal statements, that sort of thing. So if anything, I think maybe we have moved in the direction of increasing sort of unanimity, or maybe it's not unanimity and ecumenicism so much as it is just people not caring about doctrinal particulars. Like that just doesn't matter to people anymore. It's much more, kind of broad, general, and kind of focused on things like the love of God, God's desire for us to enjoy life, be happy, experience the hope of heaven, and then to arrive at that destination. Kind of a love conquers all approach to Christianity has become what people really value about Christianity in America. And as a result of that, a lot of doctrinal particulars and denominational distinctives are no longer valued by very many people at all. Maybe clergy people, but not very many people in the pews really make much of a distinction or see much of a difference in that regard.
What is the blame for that? What is the meaning of being able to say that in a way that brings value to the decision making process of all these different people? I would love to be able to visit for just a second about about my some of my classes. If your classes are like mine, I have a variety of folks from not only all over Amarillo, but all over the world.
Right.
And they are, any good mix of different religious backgrounds and traditions.
Right.
And I absolutely love getting to talk with them. We're not talking about, religion or religiosity. We're just visiting about, contemporary American events. And because it's as personal to them as it is personal to me, sometimes those issues pop up in our conversations, not because we're trying to, convert each other, but because they're fundamental to who we are as people. And it's hard, not impossible, but it is really hard and doesn't ever feel right to mention this idea over here that might be in contrast to another without also saying and qualifying with, and that's what I believe.
Sure. Yeah. So just to be clear, you teach courses in government, Texas government, U.S. government, American government. I teach courses in American history. And I think what you're pointing at is that one of the things that we can never get away from is the fact that what we call religion is the biggest slice of culture. It's a huge and incredibly important slice of culture. And that's true not only at present, of course, it's true historically. So what I tell my students is, if you're looking at the past of America and you're not paying attention to ever religion, then you're not doing it right, because this is such a hugely significant part of culture. When we're talking about religion, we're talking about higher powers, we're talking about rituals, symbols, community, ethics, morality, the list goes on, and conceptions of the afterlife, so that in most religions, there's some connection between things like ethics and morality, behavior, and what one expects about his or her destiny, and perhaps an eternal destiny, and all that's big time stuff. That's important to the individual. As a result of that, right? This is why religion is such an important piece of our lives and such a big slice of culture historically and at present. And so, again, whether we're talking about government, laws. The connection between morality and law is captured in the expression, there ought to be a law.
There ought to be
a law. Okay, so the language of oughtness is the language of morality. Law, of course, is legislation, so there ought to be a law. And then, so when we think about, I teach my students about what's known as the First Great Awakening, which is prior to the American Revolution. The second Great Awakening, which comes on the heels of the American Revolution, and how important those episodes, however we interpret them, how important they are to the fact that Protestant Christianity in America is heavily revivalistic. So campaigns for Christ, gospel meeting, this sort of thing is a hallmark of American Christianity, like it's not a hallmark of Christianity almost anywhere else on the globe. And to the degree that you do see revivalism in other parts of the world, it's largely the result of the influence of American missionaries who went to that place and made it a hallmark and an aspect of the way in which Christianity gets lived in those places.
That is fascinating, and we've got so on some of these charts, and I'll try to put these charts available on as we're talking about them on our podcast screen on YouTube, so that y'all can take a look and see what we're pointing at. I've got the Second Baptist Convention as being one, the non-denominational Christian Church, Churches of Christ, Assemblies of God, the General Council of the Assemblies of God, the Catholic Church, Jewish Jehovah's Witnesses, United Methodist Church, the Church of God in Christ, National Missionary Baptist Convention of America, United Pentecostal Church International, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, And then Muslim estimate is what we have, is a Muslim estimate. We have a Seventh-day Adventist church. And then we have this category of other. I think we have some Buddhist, we have a couple of Buddhist temples here in town, and we've got, there are still more. We had to do the top 10 basically here for this, just because just the element of time, but it is interesting, and we could continue to go on. We'd be cutting some of the other factors out just based on their size, but we were trying to get the most population, right?
Sure.
For Amarillo.
Yeah.
So right now, this 14% of the pie is belonging to the other category, whatever that is, and
which is so typical, or it's symptomatic of religion in America, where a lot of groups want to be rather nondescript, for this very reason that if there's a traditional denominational name, then it appears to be old school institutional religion, which again, a lot of people in America have some sort of a negative connection to or association with. So to the degree, what was it? It was Sprite or 7-Up years ago marketed itself as the Uncola. In that same vein, there are a lot of religious groups today that want to present themselves as the unchurch. Simple Christianity, basic Christianity, no denominational affiliation, or if there is a denominational affiliation, it's truncated. So what you'll have sometimes is you'll have groups that are essentially Southern Baptist congregations or congregations of the Church of Christ that will simply call themselves, right, the White Rock Church, or whatever the case might be, or the Sand Creek Church, or whatever. And this is in a move that's deliberately, it's designed to cut off any kind of denominational affiliation or name that would lead somebody to say, well, I'd go to any church besides that. I'd go to every church in the country besides one like that, so I'm staying away from that. Well, if the name's not there, then you're not going to recognize that negative association is not going to be there. And so, so nondescript, unchurched, if you will, is really popular in America these days for that reason.
There's I guess for all of our talk, having grown up in the Church of Christ, I remember as we got older and started to see that there were other churches in Muleshoe, the city that I'm from. There was another Church of Christ there called Avenue D. I think that's the name of it, and it was just a different church. It was a younger congregation led by Mr. Shelburne, who is, he was my best friend's dad, and we had so much fun just going. We didn't play inside the church, but there were times when we played all around the church all the time. I think that there's certain tradition about that, having traditions around that as well, like where you're also playing around churches, right, I think might also kind of inform to some degree, and because that's a certain level of personality that a church takes on.
Sure.
So like when a certain amount of time has passed and maybe a church has had an affiliation with some other church, and maybe they're trying to get back on the right path and to be a more pure path, a straighter path, and name it something that correspondingly, isn't.
It's interesting that you talk that way, because I think what you just said is typical, and it's symbolic of when people talk about their religious lives. They typically do not say, well, I've got these 5 doctrines, or these 4 cardinal teachings, to which generally what they do is they tell a story. And I think that inherently human life is sort of narratival. It's kind of story based, and then includes our religious life. So it's interesting that when people talk about religion, like about a lot of other things that are important to them, they'll typically begin by telling you a story about someone they met, a place they used to go, an experience that they had that was really a touchstone for them. And so, and in an era when the fastest growing religious demographic in the United States is the nuns, unfortunately for institutional religion, a lot of those stories have to do with experiences, like bad experiences. Like, we used to go to this church and my parents raised me in this church, but there was this one guy there, right? There was this one family there, and they seemed to be the antithesis of what the church was supposed to be about and what Christian love and godly living was supposed to be about. And then we had this incident. We had this run-in with those people, and my parents said, "That's it. We're never going back to that church." But we never found another church to belong to, and ever since then, I've basically had nothing to do with organized religion. So again, whether it's negative or positive, my attraction to a religious institution, or my being repulsed at the thought of going to that place, it's not that people are saying, oh, well, they teach this particular doctrine, or there are three basic teachings associated with that church that I just can't buy. Generally, that's not the deal breaker. The deal breaker is the really negative experience that someone had. So I think what all that kind of leads me to is the idea that the barriers, if a church is growing or if it's declining, the barriers to affiliation with that church are not theological. They're sociological. They're not doctrinal. They're narratival. What kind of experience, what kind of story would you tell about your connection to, or lack thereof, with that church?
One thing that I would love to be able to find out based on numbers, I would like to, it's just an issue, as we talked about this, and you came into my office and said, "Hey, this is the idea that I have for the podcast. Look at this. This is the article that I've been reading, and I've been doing some other stuff on the side here with it." One thing that has made me really curious about is, from a political connection to it, seems to be, and I would love to know again how connected it all is. People's want and desire to have multiple perspectives, knowing on one hand that the Catholic Church has a stance on abortion, like that the Catholic Church has a stance on abortion. And that is a complicated issue. That too is a complicated issue because the Catholic Church knows that there are human beings that are members of the Catholic Church, and that's true with, I guess, every big church.
And not all of them accept everything that the church teaches.
Sure, but they have
or in belief,
stronger bonds, stronger glues there to them. And so in 2021, 2022, when the Roe v. Wade case gets overturned by Dobbs v. Jackson in Mississippi in 2022, or was it early 2023? It was 2022. When that case happens, does it make things worse in that sense? Like, do the political and identity to and with those religious bodies and your feeling toward feeling included in the services, or desire to be included in the services, kind of come and go based on your personal and political ideology and how salient that issue is? I picked abortion because it is a very salient topic.
Sure.
Doesn't matter if it's Monday, you probably still will care about it if I ask again on Sunday, and then Sunday night, and then Monday morning again. It'll be all over, started over again.
I think that people's reactions, my sense is that people's reactions in America to the most recent Supreme Court ruling that basically repealed or overturned Roe v. Wade and made abortion a state's question, the question that has to be decided by state legislators. I think that the reactions in America to that are just symptomatic of overall polarization. Maybe they serve to advance that polarization, but they certainly reflected that polarization. And as you're indicating, there's this overlap, there's this connection between whether or not a person is religiously affiliated, and whether or not that person would identify himself or herself as a person of the left or a person of the political right. There are those correlations that are really interesting, and people of course interpret those in very, very different ways. So that's my kind of general non-answer answer
Yeah.
to your question.
No, it's good.
Because I really don't have a good grasp on that. I mean, it's one of those things that we notice and that we're aware of, but being able to really size it up is something that I have the hardest time doing. I mentioned a minute ago that there are among the nuns, there are these people who are duns, and then there are these people that the article calls evangelical duns, and I would call them evangelistic duns, mainly because evangelical, there once was a time when that word meant evangelistic. I'm trying to persuade others of the truthfulness of the religion that I subscribe to. That's evangelism. So in Christianity, evangelism is trying to make disciples or Christians of other people who are not yet. And so more recently, evangelical, that's kind of what evangelical used to mean. And more recently, evangelical has come to mean subscribing to a certain set of theological positions. It's kind of like what's in your head, not what you do. When you try to persuade other people of that, more recently, the word evangelistic is, so I would have picked a different word than the authors of the article did. Yeah. So I'll call them evangelistic duns. And this is a relatively small group of people who are not only nuns, they have no not church affiliation, nor will they ever, according to them now, nor will they ever go back to church, as it were. And then third and finally, they're actually trying to convince other people of the bogus character, the toxic character of religion. And so you have to be a dun. It's an ethic and something that they're, and one of the things that the authors of the article pointed out was that evangelistic duns tend to be particularly unhappy, not particularly balanced people, and that's not a reflection necessarily on the truthfulness or the goodness or the lack thereof of their position. It's just something that they notice that psychologically, emotionally,
like Sam Harris.
Well. Now, I'm not casting aspersions on. I don't know the relative happiness or unhappiness of Sam Harris, but he's a person who would say that and has said in public that people ought to be done with religion. I think he really characterizes religion as a throwback to a pre-scientific world, a world where reason was not in control. Things like superstition, things like charismatic leadership was really in control of society. And so he's basically saying that's something we ought to cast off. But he definitely is. He would be in the category of evangelistic duns for sure.
It's pretty interesting too, because the political identification thing. I mean, I'd like to know what those numbers are to some extent, like how. How big of a difference did it make that President Trump won in the last election, for example? It would be interesting to find out, because there you have a, charismatic leadership or an energy, some form of energy type leadership, leadership in a movement, a call to action, followed by some pretty dramatic events that all of us watched unfold on TV, like the attempted assassination attempt, the second one, and where they ended up firing at the guy on the tree line there at the golf course.
Yes.
Sounds like a really not a very good one. On the other hand, that the Secret Service were on that one, yes. And that was good to know. It's just these are all of those types of things somehow play into the religiosity, because then you get him a week later at the RNC, and he is. He's living life. He's living his best life. He's up there looking like, and saying, they tried to take my life. They tried to take my freedom. They tried to take my life. They tried to, you could say William Wallace type character right here.
Right.
the reason I'm bringing it up is because you've almost got your own got your own type of gospel story playing itself out. And I know that's one of the things that makes the Bible so special. And so what we believe about our religious texts and what we believe so special is because they are so pertinent to, hey, look, this right here is all around you.
Sure.
And yeah, what we're saying is this book is, you'll never know really how old this book is. We're never going to be able 4,000, 5,000 years, however old the people claim. Yeah, who knows? But the relevance and pertinence of what it holds will never be undone.
Yeah. My interpretation of the 2024 election is that, and I suppose every election could maybe be characterized in this way, but I thought to myself in the middle of last year, what's going to happen in November is the least popular person in America is going to lose to the second most popular. The most unpopular person in America is going to lose to the second most unpopular person in America. So I think the Democratic Party just had a very unfortunate situation with their incumbent candidate, and then was on fairly short notice replaced by another candidate who was not particularly strong. And as a result of that, Trump was able to win the presidency. He had the support of a lot of conservative Protestants in America. Again, that overlap, that correlation between political outlook, political affiliation, and religious life is that you can see that, and that story is really difficult to tell. Those facts are really difficult to kind of tease out, and how are they related to each other? Right. Is this just a mere correlation? But how do you establish causation, or where someone's voting proclivities come from with regard to their religious affiliation and belief system? That is really slippery stuff. Yeah. That is really difficult stuff to.
And particularly though there's also the same thing going on in political parties is what I'm trying to say, that the whether it's fractious thing now, where you've got single issue voting, things that people are willing to not really pay attention to anything else, but only care. And for conservatives, it tends to be Second Amendment stuff. Anytime it's under worry, under a democratic regime or something like that, and they're going after, targeting a specific type of rifle, for example, that the whole premise behind gun is this is really a referendum on just rejecting that. I felt like to an extent there was an element of that in this presidential election, but also that the way that the numbers, one of the reasons that the numbers continue to be it continues to be difficult to tell how people are going to vote based on their identity, because people may not know how they're going to vote based on their identity.
That's right.
And so maybe they are Democrats, but you know what? I see the people that are working with Republicans on this issue. I see a Bobby Kennedy here. He seems like a reasonable guy. He says things that I agree with every now and then, in terms of the environment. But I really don't trust him on his vaccine policy, which is why I'm a Democrat and not a whatever. But I mean, that goes to show though there's a lot of fluidity there with between Democrats and Republicans, depending on who the person is, and it makes you wonder, like, how strong do you believe in your party affiliation if you're willing? Because I mean, I always heard stories back in the day about people that were, Republicans, Eisenhower Republicans, and, that they believed in the Republican principles of, the national need and desire to protect the country. And you know what, beyond that, make sure you're protecting the states, but the states really have their own principle. If you're violating that, you need to make sure that you're staying in your own camp.
Sure.
And that being said, like the people, there was a lot more, it was more solid and more well built, I should say.
I think so. So if I hear what you're saying, there once was a time when people's their political affiliation and self-identification seemed to be a lot more. It was based upon, and you can draw a parallel here to what we were saying about religion a minute ago, and that is there used to be a time when people would go to this particular Protestant denomination because that's my brand, and the loyalty is gone. Now it's very much what is it about this church that really appeals to me that has nothing to do. Now, if a church began to say, well, we're going to begin preaching and really bearing down on this really bizarre teaching, people, that might be a deal breaker for some people. But other than something like that, people are going to make decisions about where they go to church or which political party they're affiliated with based on things that are not as maybe as obvious or articulated by the party or by the denomination as they used to be. And so now it's, the way people vote, their political proclivities have a lot to do with worldview, gut reactions to single issues, that sort of thing, which really makes it an interesting, fractious, and in many cases unpredictable. Notice how much unpredictability has been associated with presidential elections recently. And that was true before, but I think that people think that, well, with polling being as good as it is now and that sort of thing, we can, in a scientific age in the 21st century, dial in a prediction, and that hasn't been possible.
Yeah. And the first big surprise was in 2016. Right. It happened to be that 2016 one. I mean, everybody stayed up to watch what was happening. And then at 9:00, they went, it was 20-80 in favor of Hillary. And then it flipped to Trump. And I mean, it was just a total flip though. It went 80 to 80 to Trump and 20. I saw, I don't know if you saw that, I guess they decided to get rid of the 538.com, the ABC News, I think, is the one, the people who owned that affiliation. And it was great while it lasted. It didn't last real long, but it was great while it lasted. And that whole idea of voter aggregations and was to be able to have the most, we're in the age of being able to be predictive analytics. And you're like, well, maybe not.
That happened because there were significant numbers of people who, when they went into the ballot box, voted for Donald Trump, but didn't want to say before or after that that's what they were going to do or that's what they had done. Do you think that's...
Yeah, in 2016, yes.
That people were either fibbing or just refusing to answer that question.
And I think of this. So there's all kinds of things that go into the way that they set up those models to begin with. But personally, I knew people who went and voted in the Democratic primary before the election and voted for Hillary Clinton in the early part of that campaign. Now, so that would kind of skew the numbers. You'd be like, oh, wow, I don't know who this person is, but they voted Democrat. She must have said something right. In fact, they actually went and voted for her. So in Texas, because of the type of primary systems that we have, you have to choose beforehand which party you're going to vote in. You can vote in whatever one you want to in the general election, but when you're selecting candidates, the parties get to have a say in that.
So do you think that they did that in order? What you're suggesting is a significant number of those votes for Hillary Clinton had nothing to do with someone having positive regard for her or her campaign.
Yes.
Do you think that they were trying to ensure that she would be the Democratic candidate?
Yes.
Like they preferred to run against
Between her and Bernie Sanders, they wanted Trump to be running against her.
Okay.
And I feel like there's probably a lot of reasons for that. But I mean, they're kind of like neither here nor there. I mean, in terms of like maybe it was a none and done situation type thing, a political one, and saying, you know what, and Oh, it's I mean, it's just we could probably do it as an entire episode just looking at those returns and kind of just talking about why that returns. Now we've got enough literature about some of it that we probably could.
Yeah. Can we shift and talk? No, we've talked a lot about an article, and I've got 3 books sitting in front of me, so we don't have time to talk about 3 books. But I do want to mention, so part of what we decided we would do is kind of jump off on, well, what have I been reading recently, and why did that appeal to me? And so, if you don't mind, I think what I'd like to do in the last little bit today is to say a little bit about some things that I've read recently. So I was going to talk about 2 books that have absolutely nothing per se to do with American history, which is my supposedly area of expertise and where I teach. And I thought, no, I need to bring in one other book that's got something to do with American history. So if I've got and these are all recommendations, but one book that I have recently processed, it's a big book, and it's a thick book in terms of the detail, the level of description in this book is it's the author's name is Colin G. Calloway, and among American historians, Calloway has really become a bit of a star of recent. He teaches at Dartmouth. His area of expertise is early America, and particularly the place and the role and the history of Native Americans or American Indians. And so the title of this book is The Indian World of George Washington, subtitled The First President, the First Americans, and the Birth of the Nation. And if you think, I mean, how many biographies or partial biographies of George Washington have been written? And one of the things that Calloway notes at the very beginning of this book is very few, if any, studies have been done about the life and the presidency of George Washington with regard to his dealings with and his necessary interactions with Native Americans. And so if you don't mind, I'm going to read the first paragraph of this book, because this is kind of what reeled me in. But in the introduction at the very beginning of this book, Calloway writes, on Monday afternoon, February the 4th, 1793, President George Washington sat down to a dinner at his official home on Market Street in Philadelphia. Washington's dinners were often elaborate affairs with numerous guests, liveried servants, and plenty of food and wine. On this occasion, Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson, Secretary of War Henry Knox, Attorney General Edmund Randolph, Governor of the Northwest Territory Arthur St. Clair, and the gentlemen of the president's family dined with him because they were hosting an official delegation. 6 Indian men, 2 Indian women, and 2 interpreters representing the Kaskaskia, Peoria, Piankashaw, Potawatomi, and Mascoutin nations had traveled more than 800 miles from the Wabash and Illinois country to see the president. Before dining, they made speeches and presented Washington with a calumet pipe of peace and strings of wampum. Thomas Jefferson took notes. And I thought, my word, how many stories related to the presidency of George Washington have him hosting a delegation of numerous and varied Native American leaders? And what Calloway is doing in this book is he's basically saying before, during, and after George Washington's presidency, the world in which he lived was very much an American Indian, indigenous peoples world. And the reason he's hosting this delegation is because he needs to, in order to make land deals, to massage future treaties between the United States of America and Indian nations. He has to do that. Fascinating book that sort of puts Native Americans back into, from the standpoint of historical record, from the standpoint of historiography, it sort of puts Native Americans back into the world of George Washington, which they've largely been airbrushed out of in lots of other tellings of the story. Before that, I had read, so about 2-3 years ago, this book by Quentin Tarantino, the famous movie director, director of Pulp Fiction, Kill Bill.
Excellent.
Yeah. Volume 1 and Volume 2, I think, of Kill Bill, stories like that, movies like that. He wrote this book called Cinema Speculation, and where he's basically talking about his life. It's highly autobiographical, and he's talking about his life as a movie lover, going back to his childhood, and then, of course, going up into his life as a movie director. And this is, if you're not a movie buff, if you don't love film, if you don't love, who doesn't love movies, but people who are really into movies want to know more about, well, who were the directors and what were they like? What was the cast and crew for this particular film? How did it come together? This sort of thing. This book, the title of each chapter, or almost every chapter, is, for example, here's a chapter called Bullet, the famous Steve McQueen movie from 1968. A lot of the chapters are the titles of movies, but what he does is he discusses dozens of films in every one of these chapters that has a movie title as the title of the chapter. And I just found myself devouring this book over the space of about 3 or 4 days and watching lots of movies that I recommend. So
that's cool.
So I think you can say it this way, that Quentin Tarantino's love of movies and his enthusiasm for film is contagious in this book. So if you don't want to spend a lot of time on Netflix or Amazon Prime or whatever, Amazon Video, watching a lot of movies, don't read this book because it will send you into that world in a really, really big way. And then another book that I recently read, because beginning in about 1980, I became a real fan of a Canadian band called Rush, which has much more recently been inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And Rush's
shady. I'm just kidding.
That?
I said shady. It's shady. They're in the. I'm just kidding. They're not. They belong there.
They belong there, and had a hard time getting in because, as they've been described so many times before, Rush is kind of the world's greatest cult band. So they were never a band that got a lot of airplay. They didn't have a lot of top 40 hits. They were known for their albums. People who were and so they had a lot of takers. They had millions and millions of fans. I've noticed that people who aren't Rush fans really don't like their music. They kind of have a very brown sound, very unique sound. We're born of kind of progressive rock and kind of a blend between progressive rock and maybe heavy metal or hard rock, big rock. And their bass player, keyboard player, singer, etc., is a guy by the name of Geddy Lee. And Geddy Lee has recently published his memoir with the unfortunate title, get this, My Effin' Life, which is, this is the best book with the worst title that has come out in the longest time. What a lame title. So,
I mean, is it lame though, because he couldn't put what he means, what he didn't, the publisher actually probably got in there and prevented him from calling it what he really wanted to call it.
Maybe.
And accepted the publisher's edit, or was it?
Was this his idea, or was this something that was demanded or expected, whatever, by a publisher? I don't know. But, anyone who's ever knows anything about Rush knows a song called Tom Sawyer. And the line, or a line in that song, part of the lyrics are Today's Tom Sawyer. And I thought a book, a memoir by Geddy Lee could be called Today's Tom Sawyer. They had one of their earliest big radio play hits was a song called Working Man, which is kind of a staple of their concerts before Neil Peart, their drummer, died and effectively disbanded the group. But it could have been Working Man. Great title for a Geddy Lee memoir, or Today's Tom Sawyer, but instead it's My Effin' Life. Anyway, if you're a Rush fan, or if you're just interested in what's the life of one of the three people in this band, really, really great book to read. You'll get a lot of blow-by-blow detail about how certain albums came together, the crafting of songs, the trajectory of the career of Rush, the trajectory of the career of Geddy Lee. And turns out Geddy Lee is the son of Holocaust survivors. Mm-hmm. So when his family came to Canada, he was. They came there fleeing the Holocaust, and so a part of this book. I'm sorry,
they were fleeing in 19. So this was after the war or the 1930s.
Good question.
Able
I
to
don't
get out
remember when they came across the Atlantic. This is before Getty was born, so he's born in Canada, but he's born to parents who had experienced the Holocaust, but I'm not exactly sure the circumstances under which. I think that information's there. And he says it's kind of interesting because 1 or 2 chapters are devoted to the Holocaust history of his family. And he says, if you picked up this book because you wanted to know all about me and my career in music and entertainment, and you want to know all about Rush, you can skip these chapters. But I could not write these chapters because they're so much a part of who I am. So he was about 10 or 12 years old when his father died, and growing up Jewish, it was important for him to go to the synagogue, I think every day for a year, in order to basically repeat the words and perform the ritual that families are responsible for in Orthodox Judaism. That this is what you do when someone in your family dies. And so he did that. So here's a person who grew up with Hebrew, maybe some Yiddish, I don't know. But so his Jewish background and his Holocaust history, the Holocaust history of his family, is something that he actually includes in this book.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, super. So those are 3 of my recent reads and books that I would recommend to you if that sounds interesting to you at all.
Cool. Yeah, that's fantastic. And I know our readers that are watching right now, whether they're in the United States or Argentina or or the United Kingdom or Canada, maybe even Mr. Lee's family. In any event, we're grateful that you guys were able to be here with us this morning. Check these books out. You can probably find them on Amazon.
Absolutely. Sure.
Or any other place that you can be looking for a good cheaper book or a book on discount or the full price. So you take care, and we'll talk to you soon next time.